you probably saw grass everywhere. I'm sure Elk Park Meadows was all grass and, yeah, yeah. Yeah, and 2 weeks before that, I went to Colorado with my brothers, and we got snow there too, Breckenridge and Keystone for 3 days. And it was really good then. March snows are good. New Mexico, okay, yeah. Wonder what that 10 feet was like in Tahoe. I mean, how do you even open? Just, yeah. Really?
Okay, it is 5:30.
Call to order the West Fargo Planning and Zoning meeting. First item here is the approval of the order of the agenda. Any questions or input on the order which it is laid out?
Move to approve.
Second.
Moved and seconded to approve. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay. The approval of the minutes from our meeting on February 13th, 2024.
I'll make a motion to approve as digitally reproduced.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the minutes as produced, digitally produced. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. Okay. Regular agenda items, number 1, it's a public hearing, A24-1, Dakota Territory, 14th edition, a request for a planned unit development at 1018 17th Street East to build townhouse-style apartments, Lot 1, Block 1 of Dakota Territory, 14th edition, Sankey. This is a continuation from February 13th.
Thank you. The applicant submitted a concept plan for a proposed townhouse development for planned unit development. A similar development was approved for the property to the west in 2016. We also reviewed a proposal last year for this site. Concept plans with setbacks show 7 3-unit and 6 2-unit townhomes with attached garages and parking in the front. The applicant is requesting a reduction in the 25-foot front yard setback to 20 feet to line up to the buildings with the west. The private access easement that they're proposing between the two properties will be signed with no parking, and the access drive will remain clear. Public Works indicated that in order for trash pickup for the 3 units to the southwest, tenants will have to set their trash cans further to the north along the private access easement. The applicant is aware of this. A 20-foot landscape buffer will be provided along the north side of the lot. A 6-foot opaque single-color fence will be located on the east side of the property to screen the view of rear yards of those properties. The property would access 10th Avenue East in 2 locations, which would allow for multiple access points and the ability to loop city services, as well as a 40-foot utility access easement along 17th Street East. There's a shared access easement on the north property line adjacent to 10th Avenue East to the west, which they intend to utilize for the west access. Despite common ownership for the development, 2 separate tax parcels exist, and the city has requested confirmation of either an access easement or an agreement between the 2 lots, as ownership could change. The applicant has provided that agreement. Staff recommends approval of the concept development plan subject to the following conditions. Number 1, the site shall conform to the R3 multiple dwelling district regulations as the underlying district standards unless otherwise indicated and approved with the detailed development plans. A 6-foot tall opaque fence shall be installed along the east side of the property to screen the public right-of-way from the rear of the proposed buildings. Number 3, a landscape buffer shall be planted between the north property line and the buildings located along 10th Avenue East. Balconies and decks shall be shown on the detailed development plans with setbacks delineated. A drainage and utility plan is to be approved by the city engineer. A signed planned unit development agreement is received and approved in conjunction with the detailed development plans. an access easement or signed agreement between lots 1 and 2. Block 1 of Dakota Territory 14th Edition is established to ensure legal access to all units as ownership could change. And number 8, detailed development plans will be subject to, but not limited to, provisions of the supplementary district regulations, the landscape standards, off-street parking and loading requirements, and the sign regulations. This is a public hearing. I'm available to answer any questions, as is the applicant.
Thank you. Since it's a public hearing, I'll open it for comment from the public at this time. Any comments, input, questions from the public? Seeing none, I'll close that. Commissioners? Questions, input, thoughts, motions?
Just a thought. Since this meets, all our standards and so on, I'll go for it. However, the west side townhouses now are using that street that's on the existing property as their access point. And just for grins, I drove through there this morning, there's 12 cars parked on that street at 8:30 this morning. Now, I understand the same owner owns both, so I'll just make a comment for the record that the people that are using that as their overflow parking are gonna have to find new overflow parking somewhere. So that's something they'll have to deal with, but I just want to make a point that they're just robbing Peter to pay Paul as far as the parking situation goes, so it's my only comment on it.
Where are they parking?
Right now,
This
this
picture.
is an existing road here.
Yep, it's along this one here.
Yeah, and then they're gonna add these townhouses, this is their garage access. So they're gonna lose all that parking. Now, there might be a few spots that could go on the west side, just a few, but like I said, it was 8:30 this morning, there's 12 cars there, so a lot of people probably already gone to work as well. So just so they're aware that there's gonna be challenges within that development.
Yep, the applicant has indicated that they will be signing the driveways for no parking, but yeah, I drove by there today. What they're proposing does meet, it exceeds our parking requirements. We
Sure.
require 2 parking spots per unit. They've got 2 in the garage and 2 in front. But, yeah, to your point, this,
Yeah, and that's why I say I won't oppose it, I'm just trying to point that out, that seems to me like there's a real need for extra parking, and this is gonna create a situation where a lot of that extra parking goes away, so.
and what we're asking for is approval of the concept plans, and then they will come back with the detailed development plans at the next meeting or future meeting.
When you said go for it, was that a motion? If not,
Yeah, I was trying to understand that one.
I'm willing to make that motion with the 8 conditions. Wasn't it 8?
Yes.
Yes.
I'll second it.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the application as submitted with the 8 conditions as presented by staff. Any further discussion required prior to vote? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. Motion passed. Thank you. Item number 2 on the regular agenda, public hearing A24-4, zoning ordinance amendments to Title 4 related to off-street parking. Apropos,
Nice second.
yes.
Oops, sorry about that. Let's get rid of this, I think. How do I get rid of that? There we go. All right, good evening, Commissioners. We have before you the formal motion, the formal recommendation for off-street parking that we brought to you at the last meeting. Zoning ordinance amendment for Chapter 4.450, off-street parking. We have had a number of previous studies and documents and recommendations to assess our parking situation and standards over several years. To name a few, the planning needs assessment initiated says that is something that we should confirm to amend in the short term. Fargo 2.0, the Fargo or the West Fargo framework study, the most recently adopted downtown placemaking master plan, but subsequent to that, we've had about a decade. We can go back into our city studies and there has been requests or suggestions by things that we've adopted into the city to make adjustments. So based on that, the parking recommendations, regulations that we're adopting at the bottom of the staff report. So we're restructuring the content for ease of clarity and use. We are updating minimum parking standards based on measurable metrics and calibrating parking standards in relationship to peer cities and modern best practices. It should be noted that the consultant that teed these up for us did do a peer analysis of our surrounding municipalities, so in North Dakota specifically. And then I think also Moorhead, but Bismarck, Grand Forks, certainly Fargo, Moorhead, and some other communities. And where they landed with us was not the most restrictive and neither the most generous, but we land somewhere near our peer cities. So with that, we're updating parking reduction options, and we are here for questions, should you have any, to bring this to City Commission based on your recommendations.
Thank you. So it's a public hearing, so we got to open it up for some public input and comment. Is there any? Seeing none, continue. Yeah, I mean, we went through it last month. I read it again. I have no specific numbers in mind to come up with better suggestions on the thresholds, which was part of our discussions last month. So it is a better format. That was one of the things that came out. So does anybody else have questions? Inputs?
I agree with what you said.
Gee, thanks.
I missed last month, but I noticed you guys been in the news again. So I'm just wondering how this affects that situation, or is that something else?
I would say that's something else.
Okay.
And yes, it's certainly, it is a subject matter that we've, as a component to that, but, and we're happy, if you like to, we could take that up at the after agenda items, if you like to discuss that specifically, but, yeah, that's.
Sometimes the media isn't accurate. I don't know if you've noticed that.
I have no comment.
I wasn't here last month either, so I read this, which was a lot of reading.
It was
It was.
very well done, too, so. I'll accept motions.
Motion to approve.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the amendment as published. Any further discussion prior to vote? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Same sign. Amendment's approved. Item 3, another amendment. This is public hearing A24-5, zoning ordinance amendments to Title IV relating to pool fencing.
Thank you very much. And we were here before you again, but to amend the recently adopted language that was put in place not too long ago regarding pool fencing. Our compliance officers came to us less than 4 or 5 years ago, in fact 2021, noting that they were having code issues with the way that the ordinance didn't at that time define what was a permanent pool and a temporary pool with the new standalone pools, and how was it define fencing. So the language was put in place, and rightfully so at that time. However, as we have moved forward, we have found that the building code, Title V, also had covered that topic very specifically into the International Pool Maintenance Code. So to avoid the duplication and subsequent replacement of that code, we are recommending that we amend and remove the language in your ordinance that's specific to what goes above and beyond what is necessary in the zoning ordinance, and put in place the language that allows us to lend a nod to what's going to be in Title V. which was in the last page of your packet, very specifically in a lot more detailed language, where that building code amendment will be brought forward to City Commission.
Okay, so we're taking out the reference in the code to.
In the
leave it
zoning code
section
specifically,
5?
so if you look, pardon me. In your packet, you will see all the previous language that has been stricken and the replacement language to be consistent with the alignment of Title V of the building code. So a private residential pool is a pool connected with a single-family residence with a multi-unit owner-occupied complex that is located on private property that is under the control of the property owner or owners. The use of the pool is limited to the owner or owners or the family members or invited guests of the owner or owners or their families. It is deeper than 2 feet. A pool that is used for commercial purposes is not a private residential pool. So within the building code amendment is the reference to the size of fence that is allowed, and it has been reduced to 4 feet minimum, which is consistent with our adjoining communities who are also applying the same standard in their ordinances. So
So
somewhat,
the forfeit is consistent with communities. Is it consistent with that international
that is correct.
requirement that was previously
That's
referenced?
correct. It can certainly be exceeded, should someone wish to do so, but for a 4-foot minimum is the standard that we
Okay.
are proposing.
And we had 5 foot in there before.
We had 6 feet in there before, which it was, and in other communities had 5.
Okay, got it. I understand now. Thank you.
So let me know if you have any questions.
No. It's a public hearing. I'll open it for public comment or input at this time. Any comment or input from the public at this time? Seeing none, close that. Commissioners? Questions?
I'll motion that we approve this one to be consistent with international standards.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to accept the amendments as published for Title IV relating to pool fencing. Any further comment, discussion prior to vote? All those in favor of the amendment, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. Amendment is passed. Thank you. Number 4, another amendment. This is A 24-6, zoning ordinance amendments to Title IV related to backyard chickens.
Thank you. At the direction of the West Fargo City Commission, Title 11 of the Animal Ordinance is being amended to allow for the keeping of chickens. Backyard chickens would be allowed with the issuance of an annual permit subject to conditions which would be administered through the police department as they already administer pet licenses. The purpose of the public hearing tonight is proposed zoning ordinance amendments to clarify language relating to backyard chickens in the rural residential and the rural estate zoning districts. According to the zoning ordinance, farm animals are conditionally permitted uses in the rural residential and the rural estate district. An amendment to the zoning ordinance would add language to the RR and R1E districts, which include, provided that this section does not apply to properties that have received a permit to keep chickens pursuant to Title 11 permits for keeping of chickens. It is recommended that the city approve the proposed amendments on the basis they are consistent with city plans and ordinances. We have provided information on the chicken ordinance, which isn't a zoning ordinance, but for your information, we've included the language, the ordinance language, that the city commission has directed the city attorney to draft. And also included in your packet is the draft chicken permit. So this is a public hearing regarding the zoning ordinance amendment, and also if you have comments on the Title 11 of the chicken ordinance, we can pass those on to the city commission.
Sorry, I just had a funny thought. You have to have little collars for the chickens.
I want to applaud Lisa for keeping a straight face. Because I could not.
I believe Commissioner Thorstad had some questions regarding the chicken permits earlier today.
Let's do public. Any public comments? Seeing none, close that section. Commissioners?
Comments, it said in the staff report that the applicant is to notify any abutting neighbors. I didn't see it in the ordinance itself. I guess I don't know what good that would do, because you talk to four of your neighbors that are around you and one doesn't like it, what recourse do they have anyway? That's the only comment, is I don't know how that piece fits in. I mean, they're probably damned if you do or damned if you don't, if there's someone that doesn't want them. So I guess that was one comment. The other comment I had is on the permit. It says at the bottom of the permit that the police department will not respond to calls relating to chicken issues. Well, you know, all the ordinance talks about foul smell, that's a play on words, but, and other violations, who should you call? Then I guess the police are licensing it, but they don't want to, they don't want to enforce, and I understand, a chicken gets out, they shouldn't be out chasing a chicken.
We have a code enforcement department. We've centralized all complaints. So the code enforcement officers will go out and take any complaints. If they find out, I guess, who the chicken belongs to, then they would cite the people for violating their permit.
Okay, I guess I recommend, I didn't see that written in the ordinance, that where you should voice complaints to, it probably should state that you should contact code enforcement officer or whomever, if the police want nothing to do with it, because otherwise, police are gonna get the calls.
Right, and they will for any complaints through their code enforcement.
Yeah.
And we did add the language after the ordinance was drafted. We had discussed with the police department and the city attorney regarding the abutting neighbors at the request of a city commissioner who had wanted language in the permit regarding, who will notify the adjacent property owners. The city didn't necessarily want to do that, so that language was added to the permit after the ordinance was drafted, so.
Yeah, but to your point, what recourse is there?
Yeah, I
So it's
guess,
like, I tell the neighbors, okay,
Right.
well, don't do it. I can do it, I got a permit.
Yeah, that's kind of an awkward conversation for the person
That forces a very
chickens.
awkward thing.
yeah,
Now, if you're that awkward with your neighbors, that's a different issue. But
Right.
it does kind of put in the policy something that is, I don't know.
Really hard to prove too.
You-
Like what if the neighbor came forward and said, well, they didn't notify me?
sure.
It's non-productive.
Yeah,
Yeah, I guess I'd take a look at it. I'd say it'd probably be better off not being in there and just, if you get a permit, you get a permit, because you
And so
can't.
you said that wording was added in at the request of a city commissioner.
Yes. There was discussion about, should the property owners be notified?
So we're treating this as a pet, more or less. Like you have to get a license for your dog, right?
Yep.
And it's the same process, you pay a fee, you get your thing.
But you don't have to notify your
You
neighbors.
don't have to
when you,
notify your neighbors
or
for your
cat.
dog or your cat.
Or your goldfish, your gerbil, your hamster.
I don't think you need permits for those.
So
No,
we,
but, on principle, on the policy level, it's equivalent to, say, a dog, or, I don't know if you have to do cats too?
yep.
What's the, I mean.
Why is there a different notification requirement associated with this, other than
Yeah, do they have to wear
the
the
structure?
I suppose that's the rabies. You have to bring the rabies certificates in for your dogs and your cats.
Oh, yeah, that's the reason behind that.
Tag.
so the city commission is going to meet about this on next Monday at their meeting. So we can forward on any comments, concerns regarding Title 11, being it's not part of the zoning ordinance, but
So we could put in the recommendation that that be stricken from the form or the,
Or at least put a question, how can that practically be applied in the situation? I mean, what recourse would there be? I mean, I suppose a neighbor that doesn't want him, he's gonna be mad whether you tell him beforehand or after.
Yeah, and even if you tried to put some sort of like, tell them and get a signature or something for documentation, you might have a neighbor that's like, I don't want it, so I'm not gonna sign, which.
Yeah.
It just, yeah, seems like a
Yes.
bad path.
If I may just jump in quick. So the action, the request in front of you tonight is to take action on the ordinance itself. The permit form in its draft form right now was just put in there for reference. And so we're not asking for any Planning and Zoning Commission action in regards to the application form. That'll be put together and finalized once the ordinance is in place, and that really is something that the police department is going to be taking the lead on. And so like Lisa said, we'll certainly pass along any comments that you'd like the city commission to consider, but I think staff's recommendation would be to not include that as part of your motion here tonight. The requested action is specifically in regards to the ordinance.
okay, but the reference to the notifying the neighbors, was that in the form or in
It's in
the,
the permit form for,
in the form, permit form?
permit form.
Okay, the draft,
But if it's a requirement, it should be part of the ordinance.
but we don't want it to be.
No, I know we don't want, I'm just saying, I don't think you can just put it in the permit form and not have something backing it up. As, if you're saying you gotta do this, you don't have anything to back it up, then it's just a suggestion.
I can speak to that a little bit, I think. So I think if we don't have it, typically the language, the way that it reads for any application form is, an application needs to be submitted as required by, whatever administrative official is in charge of that ordinance. And so we don't typically get into every single detail of an application form in an ordinance, and I can defer to the city attorney's office on some of the specifics there. I forgot the second part of my, where I was going with this, but apologize.
Well, it's something for the city commission to figure out.
Yep.
I guess,
Yep.
I think,
That's why we'll
I
certainly.
think we have legitimate thoughts on it anyway.
If we made a motion, we just make that a recommendation.
Right, to consider.
Consider it.
You could certainly do that. Yeah.
Last question, and I don't know if it's well defined in there. I think it did talk about having to have it fenced off the run area. Because some people constitute their whole yard as a run area. Is it defined? I know you gotta have them in so far and certain amount of fencing, but, is that well defined, or are they gonna, if you have a opaque fence going all the way around your backyard, is that considered a run area?
They have to have a separate run in a coop. They can't be running loose in the backyard. So this area is the coop and run area is delineated on the permit.
See, the run means an enclosed outside yard for keeping chickens. Technically, they could use it, if their yard is fenced, the whole yard could be the run. I mean,
I think did they add some language, Aaron? Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, I didn't read it that way.
We added some in the staff report, I think since
that
the
has to be
permit was done,
separate.
we added some language to the, on the permit, chickens must be confined at all times in a coop and run and may not be allowed to run at large. And then we added some additional, or they added some additional language regarding screening.
Yeah, I thought it said like a minimum of 4 square feet per chicken and a maximum of 10. So.
and there's setbacks here too.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I don't think they can use their whole yard.
Right.
So they'd have to have a fence within a fence then? Good, okay, I just want to clarify that, because I'm sure some people feel I got a fenced yard, that's all I got to do is keep them inside my fence. So, okay, good.
So every year they have to pay the $25 fee, and
Yes, and it's our understanding that the surrounding communities maybe have 4 or 5 permits. Fargo and Moorhead, they don't have very many, not very many people.
$25 buys a lot of hay. But this has been my favorite issue ever.
Okay, any other questions or discussion?
Just to be clear, the city commission will ultimately approve the permit form itself?
So the city commission basically directed the city attorney to work with staff on the ordinance. And so in terms of the application form and the implementation, typically those things are determined by staff, not necessarily approved by city commission. And so the intent here again is that the police department, at least as of right now, the police department would be administering the licensing for chickens. And so the planning department would not really have any sort of role in this. But in terms of some of the questions earlier about enforcement and things, as Lisa indicated, we have a code enforcement office within the police department that would typically receive a complaint. The intention of having this annual license is that it gives the city something to revoke if they are found to be in violation of something based on a complaint received. And so if a neighbor does have an issue, they would be able to call the city, complain. There would be an investigation, if you will, just to see if there is in fact a violation of the ordinance, and if so, we can take corrective actions, or the code enforcement folks can take corrective actions at that time.
So our direction is to approve the chicken ordinance, and we could or could not add a comment about encouraging the chicken permit to be compliant with the chicken ordinance.
So the zoning ordinance, those two lines, provided this section shall not apply to properties that have received a permit to keep chickens pursuant to Title 11 permits for keeping chickens, which is just an added line to the R1E and RR district regulations.
So I can't call it the chicken ordinance?
Sure you can. Pertaining to backyard chickens.
Repeat that and make it a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve the proposed chicken amendments to the ordinance, and that they are consistent with city plans and ordinances.
I'll second that because I want my name on this.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the amendments as laid out by staff. Any further discussion prior to vote? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. Amendment passed. Are there any non-agenda items to discuss in the regular agenda?
You guys did a great job in that last meeting. It could have been very, tense, but you guys did a great job. Thanks.
So, next item is adjournment from the regular agenda. Take a motion.
I'll motion that we adjourn the regular agenda.
Second.
Moved and seconded to adjourn from the regular agenda. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay. Regular agenda adjourned. Discussion topics. Proposed revision to Title 4 ordinances regarding general subdivision provisions, nonconformities, and temporary signs. Uh-oh, signs. This is your least
Yeah, can we
favorite.
talk about chickens again?
All right, well, good afternoon. So following up on kind of what we did last month and what we'll do probably the next couple of months is we will continue to introduce topics of potential text amendment to Title IV here a month in advance of bringing them forward to you for some final action. And so tonight, again, we have 3 new items to introduce. The first I'll touch on is the general subdivision provisions, and then I'll get into the temporary signs and the nonconformities. So to start with, the general subdivision provisions, this section has to do with more of our process and kind of the defining overarching requirements for our subdivisions overall. And so, as noted in the memorandum here in your meeting packet tonight, here again you'll see that there is some intent to restructure, and I'll zoom down to the proposed ordinances here, to restructure some things to make it a little bit more approachable, user-friendly, a little more organized in terms of where to find information. So that's kind of a common theme that you'll see in a lot of these ordinances that we're bringing forward here. We're also looking to update some of our application standards to match current practices, in terms of some of the outdated references that are in the current code. Things like, we currently require X number of full-scale printed plats to be submitted at the time of application. Whereas nowadays, it's much more preferable just to receive a virtual copy of many of these things, for example. And then lastly, the main thing that I'll touch on here tonight is the reclassification of subdivision types into 3 different categories. And so here, the proposal is kind of 3 different classifications of subdivisions. The first would be the administrative subdivision, which would include some of those things that probably doesn't really, that in our opinion, staff's opinion at least, does not really warrant the full-fledged, Planning and Zoning Commission recommendation, City Commission action. It's time-consuming and just kind of delays folks when they're just looking to do something relatively simple. And so the administrative subdivision would include things like lot line adjustments, when you have 2 neighbors just looking to, slide a property line over, a couple feet due to, an old fence or something like that. Lot mergers, if somebody owns 2 adjacent parcels and they want to merge them into 1 parcel, for a development. Lot retracement plats, which is what we call when we have an existing parcel that's been in existence since prior to 1985, but has never been actually surveyed into a formal subdivision plat. That's something that exists today. And then lastly, just lot splits, when somebody's looking to split a lot, kind of like a lot merger, split a lot into, 1 lot into 2. So those are the types of things that we're proposing just be administratively reviewed and approved through the creation of this administrative subdivision. It would still be, the intention at least right now is to still have a plat document that will be recorded, and so it would carry the same effect as the subdivision plat. It just removes some of the timeline for somebody looking to do something relatively simple. The second category would be the minor subdivisions, and that would be something that we're proposing that gets approved by the Planning and Zoning Commission, as opposed to, currently our practice is that you guys approve a preliminary plat, and then that preliminary plat becomes a final plat. The final plat gets approved by City Commission. With the minor subdivision, the intention would be that the final plat just comes directly to the Planning and Zoning Commission. You guys can review it and approve it. It doesn't need to go on to City Commission for final approval. And that would include things like the platting of 5 or fewer residential lots, or perhaps some simple replats that are, we'll have to kind of further flesh out what those parameters are, but something, again, relatively simple, but a little bit more involved than the administrative subdivision. We don't anticipate there would be a whole lot of minor subdivisions, but from time to time, they are relatively simple and something that probably doesn't warrant the full review, or excuse me, the full City Commission approval. And lastly would be the major subdivisions, and that's basically what we have today in terms of the way that we take our subdivisions through the process. And so, in summary, that's just the staff level review, bring it to you all for the preliminary plat approval. The preliminary plat then gets finalized, turned into that final plat, and then that final plat gets approved by City Commission. So kind of same as we do things currently. And this would basically involve anything that's not categorized as an administrative plat or a minor plat. So anything involving right-of-way, anything involving kind of lots of different lots, things like that. Anything involving an improvement agreement or any of those subdivision improvement agreement or park dedication, those types of elements would all be the major subdivision classification. So that's kind of the highlights. Included in your packet is the draft language. Again, we don't really have the red line version. That would just be very cluttered. And so we have the draft version included as an attachment first, and then the current ordinance is following that in terms of the language that currently exists. So I can be happy to talk through any specific sections. We do anticipate cleaning up the language a little further before we bring it back to you all for a recommendation. The subdivision or general provisions does reference a few other sections, and so that kind of starts to complicate things as we start to make references to things that may also be shifting in the future. And so we just need to make sure we're kind of thinking through some of those things, and we might delay this until some of these other items that we're working on can catch up so that we can just confirm that there's consistency.
So we might not be voting on this next month?
Hopefully, but maybe not. I don't want to make any definitive statements here today, but we can certainly provide an update for you next month if we don't bring it for action. I'm just going to give you an update of anything that
You
has
mentioned
changed.
you're cleaning up some things. When will we know that there's
Sorry, what was that?
when will we know when there's a version that is cleaned up to read?
Oh, yeah, we would bring that, well,
Because
but I should take a step back. I don't,
reading it in the meeting, is
Yeah.
difficult, obviously.
I don't anticipate there being a lot of revisions to this, just some kind of slight tweaking.
So read this one.
Yes, yes. This one's 95% of the way there.
Okay.
I'd say. And so I think our intention would be, if we do tweak things, we would just kind of highlight anything that we have that has changed when we bring it to the Planning and Zoning Commission for a recommendation.
Now, this structure, this whole administrative minor, major, is this used in other communities? And we tapping it out of some other cities that have done this that?
Yep. It is, maybe not necessarily in our metro here. We'll have to kind of do some double checking there. Like a lot of these ordinances that we're working on, we are working with a consultant called Clarion Associates, and they do work nationally. And so they are pulling some of what they're proposing in terms of some of these edits from other communities that they have worked with. And so we could certainly find some examples around the country that do this. And then with the things like the administrative, subdivision plat, that would be kind of a new legal document that we would just need to, confirm with the city attorney's office that we are checking all the boxes in terms of a recordable document.
And, we're kind of taking away approval process from the city commission for 2 levels.
Correct. Yep.
Do they know about this, or, well, I'm just wondering if this is something that is, hey, we'd like you to simplify, get rid of some red tape. I mean, it's a great
Nope.
objective,
Yep.
but doesn't mean they want it.
Correct.
Lose
There's been no
control.
conversation with the full city commission with these items. So we're starting with the Planning and Zoning Commission on these discussions. And so if
Okay.
there are concerns in this direction, that's the type of comments that we want to hear. If you guys are not interested in us pursuing the administrative subdivision, let us know now, and we won't pursue that further, and we'll, tweak the ordinance accordingly.
Well, I could tell you what I think about it. I think it's great, because when we're voting on things that are so, say trivial, but so just minor and technical, I'm not adding any value. I don't know, but,
No, and it just slows people down from being able to get stuff done.
Yep.
So I think it's good. It's just when you take authority away, or you move authority, I should say.
Yep.
I want to be careful not to,
Yep. Absolutely.
so that's the subdivision part.
Yep. Any other questions, thoughts, comments on that one? Okay.
I think it's headed in the right direction.
All right. So the next section I'll talk about here. If we can scroll down to it. These are some proposed amendments to the sign code. And so here, similar to the backyard chicken ordinance, the West Fargo City Commission directed the city attorney to work with staff on some amendments specifically relating to some of those, if you maybe see them around town, but those semi-truck, tractor trailers that some folks park on a oftentimes vacant lot, and they slap a sign on the side of it, and they kind of use it as a temporary sign. The city has had some enforcement issues with that, and due to the language that as currently exists, there's just some hindrances to the city's ability to enforce some of that, some of the existing sign regulation. And so the intention with this ordinance is to kind of clarify and kind of make it clear that that type of sign is not, or that type of use of a vehicle or a trailer or anything like that is not an appropriate, there's not allowed as a temporary sign. So there's just some minor tweaks to the existing language. So the first section here just talks about the use of temporary signs. Clarifies that temporary signs are restricted to less than 12 square feet in area. That's actually an existing regulation, but that regulation is found within the definition of temporary sign, and so just kind of bringing that size restriction a little bit more front and center here. Clarifying that holiday signs need to conform with other regulations of the sign code. They're not just exempt. And then I think the biggest edits here are under the category of prohibited signs. Just some tweaks here to specifically state that signs attached to semi-truck trailers or motor vehicles, other than a high-impact sign or a portable sign as regulated by the ordinance, is a prohibited type of sign. And so we do have portable signs, for example, that is a licensing and permitting option that we have available for folks that do, those neon letterboard type signs. There is the ability for folks to do that. They just need to get that license and that permit ahead of time is all.
So I got a question.
Yep.
I'm in the trailer business. We make big trailers.
Mm-hmm.
We wrap a couple of them for advertising, put Trail King on the side, real big. Does that fall into this then?
Potentially, yeah. And so I think we've got some language in here. So let's see.
Not to make it personal about me, I was just using it as an example.
Yep. So the intention here is that the language will read, signs on or attached to equipment such as semi-truck trailers or motor vehicles, where signage is a principal use of the equipment on either a temporary or permanent basis, is a prohibited sign.
Okay, so signage is a principal use. I mean, because like, right now, we're going to farm shows, so we have this trailer that has a nice wrap on it, and makes it look cool, and,
But you're hauling stuff in it, so your principal use isn't.
well, we're showing the model around at shows and using it as a demo. So if
Yeah.
it's sitting someplace in my yard, is it a sign?
So the intent is to not, prohibit things like vehicles or trailers or trucks that have company logos on the side, and they're, you see them around town all the time, and you're parked at a
Right.
job site, what have you. The intention is that you can't just park that thing on a vacant lot somewhere for the
I'll
the
use
sole
the
purpose of
example
using
that I
the
see
sign.
all the time, Magnum Electric, he always parks a trailer out on the
Yeah,
Cheyenne exit and says Merry Christmas.
or Giving Hearts Day, or,
Yeah,
yeah, it's there all the time, isn't it? So that one would fall under this, because it's just parked
Correct.
there, it's its primary use.
Yep.
okay.
Yours
Yep.
wouldn't, 'cause it's a
However,
human.
get devil's advocate. They throw a bunch of parts in there.
Storage now.
Storage now. I got my insulation in there. I'm Joe Construction Company, and sure, it's parked on my lot I own over here. It says Joe's Construction, but primary use is I've got that for storage of my insulation. Under the way it's written, that's not a violation.
Fine.
Yeah, and that's where it becomes a real challenge.
Why this is our favorite topic.
Yeah,
I think I would just say, taking a kind of bigger scale view at this, I know we're not going to get it perfect here, and the intention is to just help our code enforcement folks out a little bit with the way the ordinance is written. And so there are going to be business vehicles parked on business sites or company offices, and the intent is not to go after those types of
not
folks.
to muddy the water up, though, would a permitting process of some sort address that issue so that they get a permit for 3 months and that's got to be off, or 2 months, or whatever the time frame is, versus just parking it there for years?
Yeah, well, we do have the high impact signs and the portable signs. That's what that process is essentially, is it allows the temporary parking of trailers with signs for X number of days.
True. Now, I don't want to grill you on everything here, but temporary signs, you say maximum size of 12 square feet. standard banners are 4x8, which is 36 square feet. So you're gonna have you're gonna allow people to have signs about this big, advertise for rent or whatever, or sale, or any kind of temporary activity. That, to me, is very minute.
That sign size restriction is existing in the code today. That's not something we're proposing.
So there's lots of banners all over the city, so those are all in violation. They're outside. Apartment buildings got them. Businesses got them.
And I'm not a sign code expert, so, but if there are violations, we are complaint driven, and we do have code enforcement staff that,
Yeah, and that's the thing, and it's okay to have the time frame in there, but 30 calendar days within 4 months, who's keeping track? I mean, until somebody complains about it, then the time clock will start.
Correct, yep.
If someone follows up on the follow-up time frame.
yep, that's what the code enforcement staff do. They go out and take photos and time.
But it's
date.
complaint generated, correct?
Correct, yep. So we're not, the intention here is not to, rewrite the sign code by any means. This was a direction that came from the city commission to help kind of shore up one specific element of the sign code. And so that's the intention here today. And I know you could,
Is the vehicles being used as a sign
yep,
issue?
yep.
Okay.
So, so that's the intention. I don't disagree with any of the, comments and concerns raised here tonight. We are aware that there are a lot of issues with the sign code. And I will just remind the Planning and Zoning Commission, the sign code itself was a project identified as part of the planning needs assessment as a standalone project in itself. And so that is kind of on a, future, intention is to circle back at some date and do a complete overhaul of the sign code to make sure that we are addressing some of these kind of known issues, as well as some of the First Amendment issues that are of concern. So, for what it's worth. But certainly if there are, suggestions or edits to the language, those
And
are
is this
comments we want to
something
hear.
we will likely be voting on next month?
Yes, that's the intention.
Okay.
I had a question yet on I don't know if you've covered these, at the prohibited signs. Item K, there's a temporary signs located on vacant lots which are not for sale or for rent signs as permitted within section 460.8K. In that same section, under I, there are site signs that are allowed, for instance, coming soon Dairy Queen, or construction by Thompson Homes or whomever. I don't know if this is gonna supersede that, and then those will all go away, because I'd say most construction sites have, electrical by Magnum Electric and lumber provided by Crane Johnson. I mean, it's kind of, that's the way the business operates. So
Yep.
to me, that would just scratch that off.
So that's not the intent, and that's a good comment, and we can certainly clarify that a little, make that a little clearer. But like, under the, signs not requiring permit, permitted signs, we have the construction and development signs, which I think is what you're referencing there in terms of, your active job sites and things that are, coming soon type things. The intent is to not, prohibit those types of signs.
True, at least the way I read it, no, the only thing you can have is the for sale or for rent signs
Yeah.
based on this subsection.
We don't have a definition of vacant lot in there, but once it's being developed, and the intention is to no longer view it as a vacant lot at that point in time.
And you've already mentioned, I know a lot of the definitions are outdated. Pennants, you talk about pennants, you can't have them in a corridor overlay district. Well, most of our major business roads are corridor overlay districts in the city. But pennants, as we all think of them, in the old days where they had a string with a bunch of cloth hanging on them. I guess there's a couple car dealers that are in that area that probably have them. But the thing that's changed now is a lot of businesses use what they call sale flags, which are on the stick, you see them? They put them out like sale now on or now hiring, and I guess based on this definition, all that's illegal as well, if you don't define a sale flag under the dependent description. And I know you've pointed out that a lot of the stuff has to be updated, but I think sometimes we're maybe, and I know we don't enforce them real well, but sometimes maybe we're being a little too restrictive on it. Excessive use of stuff, I understand, like parking a trailer for 2 years on somewhere. But a business trying to hire employees and putting one of those out there for 2 weeks, to me, seems part of doing business and trying to get employees. So at any rate, I'd just say before we start writing some of these stuff, and again, if we don't enforce it, I mean, people are gonna do what they're gonna do, but consideration should be made as to how it affects, the operations of the businesses as well. And yes, I come from a sign background, so I don't own it anymore. Really? Yeah. I'm just saying that it sometimes seems like a good idea, but in practical usage, it's not practical. And I know there's abuse out there too.
Oh, and we're more than happy to take any specific suggestions you have in that regard.
Yeah.
And we'll try and incorporate those before we bring them back to you.
So a flag that does not represent a country or state would be prohibited, if I'm reading this right.
Again, I'm not a sign code expert. I don't have it memorized, but I can.
It's just-
And that's our old language.
That's in the old language?
Yes.
There's so much language here to read. And you're not regulating profanity on those flags or anything. I've seen more and more. Yes, it's a free speech issue.
Well, we're also not going to try to rewrite the whole
No.
code right now.
No.
This is an amendment to address one specific issue. You guys are bringing up many other
No, I'm
challenging
just trying to-
aspects.
I'm trying to read all this.
And when he tells me that we're going to be going down the redoing the sign, I might retire.
Well, I think that brings up a question, though, of, it seems like we're on the precipice of Pandora's box here, and if we open up this because the city commission, it's hard to
Stop?
peak, yeah, right, hard to stop, and, then we're sort of endorsing our sign code with all of these issues that we know about. How, I don't know, I guess two
Don't touch
thoughts.
it because it's so messed up that we would have to fix the whole thing?
Well,
Touch it and tell
I
you
get-
think
It's
that-
like working on a rusty car?
I don't know, how insistent is the city commission that we resolve this, seemingly minor issue, my thoughts, but or and secondarily, how long until we really get into doing a revamp of the entire sign code? I just emailed you today and said I was in for another 5 years, but I'm gonna retract that message.
I received. In terms of the commission, I can't speak for them, I suppose, but that was the direction that we received from them, and so we are bringing it forward as such. In terms of the timeline for the, any sign code rewrite, we have another handful of other probably higher priorities that we are wanting to focus on before we get to that, and so, the biggest of which being the growth area master plan, which is, kind of top priority in terms of kind of next big projects. And so, that's probably a couple of years, that we'll be focusing on that and some related items in terms of the lagoons area and other things like that. And so, probably not, 3-4 years at the earliest is what I would best guess today in terms of when we would be looking to crack open an entire rewrite of the sign code. But don't quote me on that.
Are there any specific pain points that the commission has indicated in signage?
I think the main thing is just kind of the enforceability of some of the current language, and so, as I said, as as complaints are received, and even as commissioners, drive around and see things and are looking to staff to, enforce things, it can be a challenge sometimes with the way that the code is currently written, and so that's probably the main thing. But I think as has been identified in the past, there's also been some more recent Supreme Court action in relation to the First Amendment that we need to kind of take a look at and update based on that more recent action. So those are kind of the two main things, I guess, that come to mind. So
The expression can of worms comes to mind.
Feed them to the chickens.
There you go, guy. Your least and most favorite.
So again, the overall intent, though, of this is to specifically address those temporary use of vehicles and trailers and those types of things. And so any specific, thoughts or recommendations that you guys have in terms of how to accomplish that, I'd say staff is all ears, and we're more than willing to kind of tweak the language between now and next month to address those concerns.
I don't have any great suggestions at this point I'll think about, but I think if you could narrow in just on that one particular item more, instead of covering temporary signs and signs in the, prohibited signs and all that stuff at this point, is to focus in on that one particular item, and maybe it's its own subsection or something in there that trailer cannot be on a lot for more than X number of days. It could be a parking type thing, on a private lot. I think that may solve it better, because I don't think most contractors are gonna wanna park it there and move it every, week or whatever you allow them to have it there for. That may solve their problem. I think, again, the biggest problem is not so much having it on there for a short period, it's the ones that put them on there for years. So again, it could be a time, whatever the time frame is, and if it's permitted or not or whatever, but it just seems to me that's, at least the way I read this, that we're getting into a lot of things beyond the trailer thing, if that's what the gist of the, or directive from the commission was, so.
Maybe we should just say that the sign can't sink into the ground more than 3 inches, because every one of those semis I've seen, it's like this. In the springtime, the weight of sinks it into the ground, and I'm joking, but somewhat serious.
All right. Any other thoughts, comments on that one?
Please no.
With all these, certainly feel free to follow up and send written comments to staff at any time, I'd say too. So the last amendment that we're looking to chat with you guys about tonight is related to nonconformities. So this would be section 4-470 of our regulations. And what a nonconformity is, for anybody not familiar, nonconformity is essentially anything that was constructed or came into being legally at the time of its establishment, but because of any changes to the zoning code or any other regulations, no longer complies with the code as written today. So those types of uses or structures are grandfathered typically as they exist, but once they change or if they're destroyed, the nonconformity section is what kind of dictates how those nonconformities ideally slowly kind of go away or are resolved into the future. And so striking that balance between allowing people to continue to use an existing structure or use, but not necessarily allowing that use to continue or to expand into the future. And so the issue that we're trying to address specifically in relation to this proposed change is in relation to non-conforming residential structures. And more specifically, when it comes to the sales of a home. So when somebody is looking to sell a non-conforming house, oftentimes the buyer, the prospective buyer, would have trouble getting a mortgage on that property if the home is found to be non-conforming, because our current ordinance does not allow a non-conforming structure to be reestablished unless the new structure complies with all of our regulations as written today. And so we do have some areas of town, specifically or predominantly in the older parts of town adjacent to the Cheyenne River, where we now have a Cheyenne River overlay zoning district that establishes a building control line to keep structures set back away from the riverbank due to slope stability concerns and issues. And so it's finding a way to provide relief for some of those homeowners that, through no fault of their own, now find themselves owning a non-conforming structure. And we've had a couple of instances in the past where sales have fallen through because the buyer has not been able to secure financing. There has been a couple of attempts at the state legislature, I think the last 3 legislative cycles, to get this addressed at the statewide level that have ultimately not been approved in the end. And so we are trying to be a little bit proactive in kind of addressing this at the local level, just to help those types of, address those types of situations. And so the proposed remedy here that we've got, the way that the ordinance is structured right now is we have 3 different types of nonconformities. There's nonconforming lots, which is a substandard sized lot, a nonconforming structure, which is a structure that doesn't meet things like setback or dimensional standards of today, and then nonconforming use, which is a use that was established prior to that use no longer being allowed in the zoning district that it's in. And so the proposal here is to add a kind of a subcategory almost of the nonconforming structures, which would be called compliant structures. And a compliant structure would be any single-family or two-family residential structure, which would include townhomes if they're on an individual lot, that was established legally at its time, but no longer conforms to some of those dimensional standards of today's ordinances. And then the compliant structures section would allow for those residential structures to be reestablished so long as they're not, so long as they're the same footprint, same general size. They couldn't, if a 700 square foot house burns down, you couldn't build a 1,400 square foot house in its place, for example. So it does limit the intensity of the reestablishment, but it does allow somebody to legally reconstruct a house if it were to be destroyed by a fire or something like that. So that's the overall intent and the proposed remedy there. Yeah, Stan, for any questions on that one?
So we're creating a new category which says it's okay. Does that change the insurance and the mortgage interpretation of this structure? Because that's the 2 things that allow it. If you can't insure it, you're
Yep.
not going to get a mortgage. And
That's understanding. Every mortgage lender is, maybe has their own set of criteria. But when we have kind of had these issues come up in the past, and we have had, whether it's the real estate agent, the owner, or the buyer, the lender reach out, that's kind of what they're asking is, I just need to know that you can rebuild the structure, yes or no, is really what they're kind of asking us. And so right now we have to tell them no. If the structure burns down, it cannot be reconstructed because it's a non-conforming structure, and currently a non-conforming structure cannot be reestablished unless it complies with all of the zoning requirements of today. And so in some of these situations, that overlay district can take up most of or almost all of that lot, and so it makes it almost impossible to reconstruct the structure. The way that it would be allowed is if they were to apply for something like a variance, and go through that process. But this just makes it a little more clean and does not require action of the city in order for somebody to get that mortgage. And that we don't do variances speculatively either, I should say, and so that's not a real option for folks that are trying to get a mortgage. Just to clarify that.
when would the structure be deemed compliant? And is that something that would be recorded against lot or deed or?
It's not anything that would be recorded. It would be based on, like anything else and like any other code requirement, it would be a staff interpretation of the ordinance. It would be somebody contacting the city and the city official saying yes or no, this is not meeting, if it's not meeting in any regard, for example, the Cheyenne River Overlay District, staff would say, no, it's not conforming, and so, based on what we know, it appears to be a compliant structure if this ordinance were to be adopted, for example. And then ultimately, it would be up to.
Adoption of this gives you or the department, I should say, the opportunity to say it is compliant.
Yep, so today we would have to say it's non-conforming. If this were to be approved in certain situations with residential homes specifically, we would be able to say it's compliant. It's a compliant structure, which has a specific definition.
That's not recorded anywhere.
Correct. Neither is non-conforming structure, so it's no different than,
Oh, that's
all of
not
these.
recorded?
nope.
Okay.
It's,
Okay, cool.
So, obviously that river setback control line is in place for a reason. We have a river that moves and a flooding problem. Does allowing these structures to be rebuilt on the same footprint within that hazardous area, does that expose the city to any liability or risk?
well,
It's something I would have to look into and try to look at some of the comments that John had left too, and something I can run back in there, but I don't know offhand.
Otherwise, we'd just let that out.
Right,
Like, we
right.
wouldn't
Yeah.
allow anybody to continue to live there if it was.
yeah, I mean, we do have, various, other building codes and different things that, it's not just the Cheyenne overlay that,
Right.
would come into play in a situation like that.
But presumably, we're smarter today about building codes and standards and setbacks and blah, 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 all the stuff that we enforce. And so allowing this, I can understand if somebody's trying to sell their home and they can't sell it because of this
Not
mortgage
insurable.
issue. I get it, that's frustrating, but I don't know, in the bigger picture, we have these new codes and setbacks and overlays for a reason. I'm not sure we should be giving in, I guess.
Yeah, but essentially, if you don't allow it to be compliant and continue on, are essentially saying, well, the value of this home is gone. Regardless if you sell it or not, gone. So,
We'd have to find them.
I don't know how that sits. I mean, so, allowing a compliance would, okay, in some ways you're
I like the-
continuing a problem, but it also is, in some situation, this is the only clean way to keep somebody from losing significant value.
I like the idea about if it can be compliant in its current status, whatever, and, you could maybe do some improvements, new siding, whatever. But if it burns down, as I understand this, we would allow them to rebuild.
Or floods,
Yeah, or if it floods
right?
and gets dislodged off the foundation, we would allow them to come back and build it right in the same spot. I have a problem with that, I guess,
Why?
because it's in a hazardous
Just
area
gonna
that
happen
we've
again?
said is a hazardous area.
But if,
Why is FEMA, so far upside down in hazard insurance? It's the same thing.
who's paying for the insurance aside, if an individual can't rebuild, it is not insurable. Private insurance, I'm talking, not even FEMA. So it's like, you can't, and then it makes it essentially
Yeah.
worthless.
There's all sorts of those situations across the country.
I don't know, it's like, something has changed since it was built.
Right.
you want to not allow somebody to keep that value? I
So
mean,
that's
it
the
would
other-
be devastating to the value of a property. For, you can't fix it if a tree falls on it, if it burns or whatever.
It's a taking, no question about it.
Yeah, so it's like, well, and why? Well, because somebody moved the line on the Army Corps of Engineers floodplain or whatever.
This would also apply to if somebody had a second garage or something that was built too close to a property line, through no fault of their own. If something happened to that structure, you would allow them to rebuild that, as long as it stays within the same footprint. It doesn't move.
Correct. They would need to meet, all current building code standards, however, and so, in a situation like that, they might be restricted for, number of openings they have on that wall, or, fire code rating of the wall, things like that. So they would still need to meet those requirements.
Interesting.
Yes. So there is, there is concerns on both sides of this, for sure.
I mean, it's been quite a while since West Fargo lost any structure to flood close to the river or not, because it does have pretty fair protection. I think that's something people take into consideration.
But there's more than that. There's that, I remember that one small house that's, by First or Second near the firehouse that we were looking at, and because of the way the lines were drawn after it was built, as far as the lot lines, it was non-compliant. I remember this was a couple of years back. I
Okay.
don't know if you were here yet. And it was, and nothing to do with the flood zone or
Right.
anything like that. It
Right.
had to do with the plot was changed or something, and that house was there, and then now it's like worthless because you can't insure it because you can't, it was no longer compliant. And it was just in this neighborhood around here by the firehouse or something like that. So, it's like, well, okay.
Was that because it was too close to the lot line?
I think
or
so.
Or did the
Something's-
lot line actually go through the house?
No, it was something, it was just too close, I think. That's what I recall. There was a case of, all right, does that make sense? So the person couldn't do any improvements, nothing. It was like, no, man, let it just run down. Okay. Anything else?
Nope, those were the three. So, like I said previously, if you think of other things or have other, concerns or want to follow up with any comments for staff, we're more than willing to hear those and look for any additional comments you have after this meeting even, so.
Well, thank you. With that, I guess we'll adjourn. Sounds good. Later. Thanks, man. Yesterday. Big 6-0, man.